Welcome to the Scituate Board of Health meeting, Monday, January 7th, 2013, 7 p.m. We'll open the meeting, and I'll take a motion to accept the agenda.
Move to accept the agenda of January 7th.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Get right into it. One thing on the agenda is the Scituate wind turbine discussion continued. I'd just like to introduce everybody, Jennifer Sullivan, our health agent from the town of Scituate, Attorney Frank Lynch, Russell Clark, Chairman, and Mike Bowser, and Producer Mary Martin, Secretary. And I think if anybody does speak tonight, please give your name and address to the Secretary so we can have that in the record. Okay, so Scituate wind turbine discussion continued. Report from the wind turbine steering committee to the board. I think I'd like to start with Ms. Sullivan, if that would be okay with you.
Okay, we've had 2 meetings. The last meeting, Mike and I participated in that. We had a consultation with town council. I had some questions, and I'm getting some answers, hopefully, later on. The community group presented a proposal for a 3-pronged approach, one being an acoustic study, another being a flicker study, and another being a health study. Scituate Wind has proposed to pay for an acoustic study that would follow the DEP protocol. Therefore, if there's a flicker study or health study, funding would have to come from elsewhere. The community proposal for the acoustic study is very close to what Scituate Wind has proposed. It varies in terms of extra testing based on testing different octaves, infrasound, aerodynamic amplitude, and doing it at a more frequent interval. Also, they would like to see the results without the averaging that the DEP calls for. They've been very agreeable to both of them wordsmithing back and forth where they disagree over some phrasing, some words, some clarity. And that's been very helpful, I think. At the last minute, Mr. Dean received a communication from the representative of the Mass Center on Clean Energy about a future study that would include acoustical testing and other aspects, which may be more in line with what the community group wants. Unfortunately, it was so last minute, and it's still a draft stage and not finite, that there is some information available we can review, but we haven't as a group reviewed it yet because we didn't have it. So at our next steering committee, we would be looking at that, and that may fill in the gaps between the Scituate Wind and the community group. And the best part would be true. So,
What's the name of this?
I think the Mass Clean Energy Center.
Mass Clean Energy Center.
So, basically, we're pretty much on consensus with the noise study, and we'd like that to make our main priority and to try and proceed with that as soon as we can. because we're pretty much in optimal time. We had a brief discussion on the most economical and expedient way to do that. The Clean Energy Center did give me a list, which I believe I shared with the board members, of possible contractors, and we were thinking that maybe if they could come up with an agreed upon small group, then an RFP could go out to them. And there would be more expedient for Scituate Wind to put that out than the town, because the town has more requirements in how they post and bid things. And since we're not paying for it, Dean's group is, that would be how it would be handled. But we're still, that's another item for discussion among the stream committee going forward. And I'd like Tom and Jerry and Gordon to fill in the blanks.
Oh, absolutely. No, we're going to go right around the horn on that one. Yeah. Got to start somewhere though. Yeah. So, is that? We'll move on. All right, thank you.
You want to start?
Sure. So we've enjoyed the interaction. It's been an interesting discussion around the steering committee table with all of the parties, different approaches, different perspectives, and so on and so forth. But I have to say that the meetings have been extremely cordial and professional, and it's been, in that respect, it's been a positive exercise. I will say, though, that there are some, I think, still some material differences in terms of the approach that we are espousing versus the approach that Scituate Wind is espousing. I will concur with Jennifer's point to the extent that I think we recognize that in an attempt to move this along, a focal point is obviously the acoustical study, but it's extremely important that everybody understands that the material components to this overall initiative, because it is so focused on the health impacts emanating from the wind turbine, is that we're not prepared to set aside or discount the importance of the shadow flicker analysis, nor the health questionnaire that we propose as part of this three-pronged approach. So I think that's the first point that I'd like to make. The second point that I think where there's a real divergence in opinion here is that the approach that we're espousing focuses on the noise emanating from the industrial wind turbine, including infrastructure and AAM. Some of the exclusions that Scituate Wind is proposing would not result in an accurate reading of those two key components. And as a result, in our opinion, we don't think that there would be an accurate analysis of the noise that's emanating from the industrial wind turbine. So just to give you an example, we've asked for a number of different octave bands as part of the approach that we're espousing. What Scituate Wind has asked for is simply an A weighting, which is essentially the noise that one hears normally as a human being, but that does not detect the lower and the higher frequencies emanating from the industrial wind turbine, which really is the aerodynamic amplitude modulation, or as my esteemed colleague, Mr. Darty, who's not able to attend, is that significant whoosh, whoosh that you hear. And that is what we hear at 2 o'clock in the morning when we're trying to sleep, and at 4 o'clock in the morning when Jerry and I are up working way too early. Modern technology also allows you to have measurement intervals of 0.10 to 0.125 seconds. And that's critical because, again, those faster measurement intervals are the one that allow you to much more accurately achieve the measurements around AAM. The Mass DEP guidelines and the perspective that Scituate Wind is espousing is simply around 1 second intervals, and that's not going to allow you to get an accurate measurement around AAM. So it's our contention that the octave bands that we've presented in our scope of work need to be retained to be able to satisfactorily address infrasound and AAM, and also that the measurement levels, the condensed measurement levels that modern technology allows you to utilize and measure be embraced as opposed to the 1 second intervals. One of the questions that Jennifer had mentioned was, she wanted a little bit more clarity as to why we are insisting on these multiple octave bands as opposed to the much more narrow range. So we've got that in a document that we're actually going to be sending to the steering committee tomorrow. So I guess the theme really is here is that.
Would the DEP recognize that study, or would they?
Pardon me?
Does the DEP recognize that study, or is?
Well, they haven't, I don't believe that they've seen our suggested scope of work or protocol. So, it'll be interesting to see what the DEP's perspective on all of this is. So, but, certainly from a DEP regulatory framework, I think it's really important to note that those, in our opinion, are very antiquated regulations that were designed and developed long before the industrial wind turbine industry was ever in the imagination of anybody in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or any other place. So, I know it's the best we've got perhaps, but it really doesn't, it doesn't apply to what we're focused on here, which really are the health-related issues that are resulting from that industrial wind turbine operating. So if we're here just to, if the Board of Health's mandate is to determine compliance or non-compliance, then, perhaps take a closer look at that. In our view, that's not the mandate of the Board of Health, and if you look at your website, it's not defined as being, your mandate is to protect the health of the citizens of the town of Scituate, and that's why we're espousing a much more detailed acoustical analysis that has these shorter interval levels and also the additional octave bands such as I've described.
Is that going to require different types of equipment or just a different software monitoring of data?
Well, Mr. Shaw said that the equipment is perfectly capable of measuring what we're requesting, but the Mass DEP does not require it, so they're unwilling to do that.
Okay, but my question is the equipment will be in the same place for the same period of time,
Yes,
monitoring the same sound?
yes.
You don't need a different type of equipment in order to measure the greater number of octaves or to do it over a 1 second interval. Is that true?
That's our understanding. Yes.
So the cost is essentially the same?
Correct. Now, Mr. Lynch, as I said to Mr. Vaz and Ms. Sullivan, Mr. Thompson and I have been cramming for a final exam without taking the course.
And I'm a couple of steps behind you, so.
You believe me, you're not. We're not acoustic engineers, nor do we aspire to be.
Okay.
And there's some other nuances in terms of wordsmithing. When there's some terminology that we've introduced that Scituate Wind says isn't necessarily relevant to their industry. But I mean, the intent of this is to ensure that we've got optimal speed or the switch is set in fast mode, which we know is a term. We've talked to many people about that. And I know that, see, one of our concerns, of course, is that in the Board of Health Steering Committee meeting of December the 18th, Mr. Shaw acknowledged that there is in fact a way of slowing down the turbine, which would also have an impact on blade pitch. And when queried by Mr. Kelly, he also acknowledged that that would then reduce the noise as well. So as part of any sort of testing regimen, we have to ensure that this is a fair and reasonable and honest test environment that we're all working in, so that results are not being artificially dealt with one way or another.
So let me ask you about the averages before I forget. Is that also something where it's just a different way of interpreting the exact same data that this equipment is going to give us?
That is our understanding.
So that there's, if we wanted to average, we can take the data and average it, or we can also ask them to just record the data, the raw data, before it's averaged, and then people can make their arguments as to what this all means.
Yeah, our understanding and our challenge and our objection with the averaging strategy from a layman's perspective is that it doesn't recognize the significant spikes that you see via the aerodynamic amplitude modulation, or at the top when that turbine goes whoosh, so that's when you get those real peaks. So you may have lower levels as well, but you're also going to have those significant spikes, and when there's averaging, that's not reflected in the actual acoustic study, which means it's an inaccurate analysis of exactly what we're dealing with here. So as we finished up the meeting, and Mr. Dean, to his credit, brought forward the email that he had received from the Mass CEC on Friday, literally a few minutes before he headed off to the steering committee meeting. He was kind enough to share that with us electronically on Saturday, and so we've had an opportunity to review it briefly, but we haven't had an opportunity to really delve into it. But we've got some points here that we have some concerns with, and there seems to be incompatibility with the Mass CEC approach when compared to the proposed scope of work that we've been espousing for some time. Again, it doesn't really seem to focus or in any way be able to measure or recognize the health-related impacts to the citizens and the residents on Third Cliff and around the complaints that we've been trying to address here. The other thing we noticed, again, just in the Q&A portion of it, a quick review of this thing, it states that the research study is designed to focus on investigating sound, but the analysis will not be conducted in locations that can be used for compliance analysis. So in terms of how that applies to what we're dealing with here, again, there seems to be a real void in the approach that the Mass CEC is espousing compared to the approach that we've tried to bring forward in our scope of work. We've also been very consistent as a community that it's been our contention that anybody that is performing any kind of an analysis, be it on the acoustical side, shadow flicker side, or on the health questionnaire side, and I recognize that those are at least 2 and possibly 3 different disciplines, that they be non-biased, unbiased, arm's length, qualified individuals to deal with that particular case. Now, when you take a quick look at the Mass CEC website, there's a section right in the very front of it in which it proudly announces, and I'm quoting, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is dedicated to accelerating the success of clean energy technologies, companies, and projects in Massachusetts. Now, it seems to me, just even that as a starting point, such a public pronouncement really in no way mirrors the concerns, or actually it reinforces the concerns of the community in terms of making sure that folks that have not got some sort of skin in the game are involved in any kind of a test process. I also understand in reviewing this that that the data that's generated from this isn't necessarily data that would be shared in the public domain. So that, again, that's a quick glance at the document. So from our perspective, sorry.
Just one other thing. I believe Mass CEC is a party in interest with Scituate Wind LLC in that they provided a $400,000 design and construction grant for Scituate Wind LLC. So we've got a party here that I contend has an interest over and above the health of the residents of the community.
We also, again, just a quick glance at the document, it seems to, although there's some wording in there, I believe perhaps around infrasound and AAM, I think they're still focused on this A weighting, the limited octave bands, and the 1 second measurement interval. So as I pointed out to you from a layman's perspective, that really does impact the integrity of the overall report. So just in reviewing the whole Mass CEC component of this, is that, in our opinion, that research study really doesn't seem to meet the investigative data collection criteria that the town of Scituate should be looking for, apropos of the real concern that this Board of Health should have around the negative health and safety impacts emanating from that industrial intrusion. So, Mr. Kelly, is there anything else that I missed in terms of?
I think you summarized it well.
So that is our view of where we are in the steering committee. So we have, even on the acoustical study, although we have agreed in principle, if we can get the scope of work properly defined, to focus on the acoustical side, we very much need to see the level of detail that we've asked for, and we're happy to consider the acoustical component first, but in the near term, we need to also address the shadow flicker issue and the matter around the health questionnaire and identifying the appropriate industry practitioners to execute that, again, being qualified, unbiased industry practitioners.
I guess the one other thing that I'd like to say is we've really focused upon the acoustics and the acoustic testing. However, the shadow flicker and the McKeever's residence is a critical part of what we're imploring. You know, the standard for regulations out there is 30 hours per year. What we've seen in videos of the McKeever home, they have 3 hours per day some of the times, and I dare say that it occurs far more than 10 days a year. So we're grossly in excess of that. So it's not a house that you can live in with that amount of shadow flicker occurring.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Recognizing, and I agree with all of you, it seems like we're down the road further on the acoustic study part of it, and that's not a big surprise here. And since we've got some funding for that I think we should move full speed ahead on that. But how close are we to getting a scope of work on either a health study or a flicker study or both, where we could start to sound out maybe how much this would cost and then start looking for funding for it?
My notes in reviewing them reflect the fact that Scituate Wind on the record has stated that they have no interest in participating in the shadow flicker study nor the health questionnaire and have no interest in paying for it.
Right.
They had some suggestions as to how we might proceed, which I think there's a significant difference of opinion on that, but my notes reflect the fact that Scituate Wind has said they're not interested in participating in either shadow flicker or the health questionnaire, nor are they interested in paying for it, and I think Ms. Sullivan alluded to that in her comments, that's money that have to come from someplace else.
No, I understand that, and that's why I'm asking, though, if we're going to proceed along those two other areas and they're not going to participate, we need to find funding. I think it's still important, it's more important maybe even for us, for you, to tell us how you see that project, how we would define the scope of it, so that we can start getting a sense of what it's going to cost, and then maybe exploring some other alternative.
If you haven't seen our proposal or proposed scope of work, we'd be happy to share it with you.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so that's it then. Okay. All right, it's daunting.
Any other questions? Would you take the patience to, like to add?
Well, I'll repeat what Mr. Thompson said, which I think it has been a cooperative working relationship. It's been civil and I think constructive. Where we differ, as you pointed out, is that, you know, as a contractor to the town, we have certain responsibilities, and that responsibility is to operate the turbine in compliance with Massachusetts noise standards. We have a permit condition which says that if there's a reasonable case that we may not be operating, the town can ask us to test it. We have said we can do that if that's what the town asks. And that is a compliance analysis of the wind turbine. We did not sign up in any of our agreements with the town to do a research study. Fortunately, Mass CEC, and I'm disappointed to hear, you know, disparaging comments about Mass CEC and the fact that they're going to go out and hire an independent engineering firm to do a study. We shouldn't be questioning, you know, their motives with independent engineering firm's motives and what those conclusions might be. It was, as I said, encouraging that Mass CEC is planning to get started on a study. In fact, they hope to get started on a study within the next couple of weeks. They called me again today and asked about what our position was in Scituate. That given Situate's location, one turbine, a lot of open area around it, I think is an ideal place to get started. And they will be studying many of the things that the community group wants them to be studied. So that could be underway probably as quickly as, or maybe even more quickly, than a compliance study, because I've already been through the RFP process. I've already signed a contract with their engineering firm, and they're identifying sites, and they're ready to get started in the next week or two. We still have that process to go through of having a scope of work, getting bids in, negotiating a contract, so.
Is Mass CEC, are they working exclusively through you, or is there any input from anybody else where they do the testing? And it was what you said, that they gave a grant, was that the one?
They gave a grant to
So you feel they may
Scituate
be a little
Wind
tainted?
LLC
Is that what
in
I'm
the amount of
gathering?
$400,000.
Are you willing to work with them though, or do you feel they'd be
It's
tainted?
not the same study.
No, I
Yeah,
understand.
it's, so what Mass CEC is espousing based on our review of the documents in no way, shape, or form reflects what the community is looking for in this scope of work. All right? It's just, it doesn't fit whatsoever. They certainly are not defined in our view as anything
It's not gonna help from that
close
point of
to
view.
an unbiased, I mean, there's documentation where they're actively promoting the alternative energy industry, particularly the renewable energy industry, and discussions around, how does one deal with the objections coming out of those that are expressing concerns?
Okay, I just want to make sure I had that clear in my head of which way it was.
So
They're willing to do a study, but
as I said earlier, it's.
in your opinion, it may not be, it may be a tainted study. that's all.
It may not satisfy our needs.
It may not satisfy, all right.
It's designed to focus on investigating sound, but the analysis will not be conducted in locations that could be used for compliance analysis. That's in the
So,
document. And in our opinion, it doesn't meet.
what's that?
May I elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah.
As you probably know, Mass DEP has gone in and done compliance testing in Falmouth. They're currently engaged in doing compliance testing in Fairhaven. They did not want this study to be one where their own compliance testing, Mass DEP's compliance testing, would potentially conflict with the study. So they ruled out Fairhaven and Falmouth as areas where they want to do studies. The fact that we're doing a compliance study here does not affect, their interest in working with Scituate to do their more detailed study. And, well, again, I'm not an acoustical engineer, as I have my colleagues here are not acoustical engineers. My reading of the request for proposals implies to me that they are looking at the aerodynamic amplitude modulation. They are looking at much shorter testing increments. They are looking at infrasound. Many of the items that the community group wants to do a research study on, I believe they will be covering.
Touching those points.
And I've given the contact information for the principal person on this study, a person by the name of Peter McPhee. I've given his contact information to Ms. Sullivan. She's welcome to call him and talk to him about the study. I have not seen the actual scope of work with the consultant. All I've seen is the request for proposals.
One of the other issues we have is that.
Second,
Sorry.
please.
One other comment is with respect to the equipment, your question you asked. It is our understanding, and we've worked with Tech Environmental, who did the original study for the town, not the study that was done for us, but the original study for the town of Scituate, when you were looking at putting the turbine, where you put the turbine. And they've also done some work for us down in Fairhaven. The infrasound equipment is different equipment, and they have to go out and rent that equipment when they decide to do a study. So it is different. That's what they have told us.
One thing Jennifer brought up, back that, is the consistency from DEP. What do they want as a protocol? Do they want the 1 second increments, or do they want the more frequent? Or if they want to compare different longitudinal buttons at different areas, do they want to be consistent on the measurement?
Right.
As I think was stated earlier, our comments, we started with the proposed scope of work that the community group put together. our comments were to try to get more in line with the guidance the DEP has provided to the town, which deals with the fact that they do take, it is an attended study. They do take a 1 second average. The reason it's an attended study is to knock out extraneous noises. Asking a human being to be responding on 1/10 of a second increments is probably a bit much. They've also asked for, they recommend doing 3 10-minute sampling. Community group wanted 1 10-minute sampling. We suggested we go with the 3. I don't know why there was an objection there. Of course, they focus on the TPA scale, which is how they did the compliance testing. So those were our comments. I believe the Mass DEP did say that if you wanted them to consider their study for compliance purposes, that you might ask them to review the scope of work.
So of course, with the Mass DEP guidelines, again, it goes back to the concerns, the 1 second intervals and the limited octave bands don't get you to where you need to be, particularly on the AAM analysis. And as a result, it's not accurately reflecting what's emanating off of that industrial wind turbine from a price perspective. But just going back to Mass CEC for one moment, in terms of the selection process around this acoustical study, just from reviewing this thing, is that it's their stipulation that they're going to identify and select, and they're not accepting applications for participation. That seems to have been clear. A technical advisory group of academia, government laboratories, and industry. And I'm assuming they're talking about the wind turbine industry. So again, these are key groups focused on the acceleration of the alternative energy space, with no concern nor obligation to protect the health of residents of any community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Of course, our concern is those here in the town of Scituate.
Point taken.
So these are the issues that we need to overcome to be able to advance this acoustical component of our overall three-pronged approach. And to Jerry's point, apropos from the Kiever situation, that shadow flicker analysis is key and crucial. And if noise is 1, shadow flicker is 1A.
Yeah, no, understand, it's a concern of the board, but it's, like I say, I think it's the acoustical part of it.
Yeah, we
We
are,
are hit head first here, it's, the timing is good, and now how does the steering committee see it? Are you guys getting together again here soon to look at the different contractors? It looks like you still have some stuff to hammer out with the sound testing, I mean, we've got two different.
I think that
points of
we're in
view, but-
agreement on the scope of work, we're in disagreement on the details of the scope of work.
All right.
And so we are going to get together again to try again to hammer something out. And then we will report back to the Board of Health after that.
Is it something that the two different scopes of work, or the details rather, can be looked at with a contractor to get a basis? I mean, I understand we've got to get one, but, you know, it's like, what is it for this and how much is it for that? And what's the time constraints on that?
The three themes are real simple.
Yeah,
A weighting, interval, number of octave bands.
right.
It is the sign.
Well, it's all part and parcel of those.
You'll pick that up from
Pick
that.
up.
Oh, okay.
You guys think this is something in the next 2 weeks that's gonna come back this way?
We have a regularly scheduled meeting, Ms. Sullivan, on the 15th, is that the date that we set, or we didn't set? No, we agreed, we look at our calendars to see if we did, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's the intent of the group to reconvene face-to-face in the next week or so.
Well, not this week, but next week.
Right.
Got, also, everyone's got conflicts this week.
Right. I mean, I see some positive stuff here, I'm happy, and I think it's great that everybody's been communicable and working together. It's just a matter of getting something now on the table that
We need a new calendar out there.
we can move forward with.
Okay.
Because I think our next meeting's the 28th, is that right?
Yeah.
I anticipate that we will meet as a group before then.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I would hope so.
And we'll have something more substantive to report at that point. That being either we're in agreement or we've hit impasse.
And we're gonna need suggestions if you hit impasse, something, because we've got to move forward too, I think, in some way, you know?
I also think we need some guidance from the board on the process, how you plan to contract with the acoustical engineer. Does the town plan to do a request for proposals, open it to the public? How do you plan to go about this?
Okay.
So we need some guidance, because I think will affect how we go about the study.
Yeah, that will also impact cost and time.
There's also some municipal bidding issues that we have to deal with.
Two approaches, right, if I understand it correctly. One is the town does it itself, or two, we all agree on everything, and then we basically let you go out and bid it. Since we all agree on it.
We agree on scope.
We go from there, which is
Where-
probably-
Which group of contractors, and then send it to them, look at what we get.
Which I would guess would be the more efficient.
Right, see what you think, yeah.
But I assume you agree.
But, I mean, just as some people object to Mass CEC doing studies, you know, the fact that we're contracting, we're paying for it, I just want to make sure that people are going to be on board.
Right. I think we understand it now.
Okay.
So the other two pieces are, if I understand it, and I apologize for not having seen it and read the whole thing, but you think are in effect a scope of work at this point in time that we could explore with contractors, or?
I see no reason why the general parameters that we proposed and how we've articulated it are terribly difficult. I mean, it's, the 151 Driftway is the house that is experiencing the highest level of shadow flicker. It can't be that difficult to document over even a reasonable period of time the impacts within that home and how it compares to what that 30-hour per annum guideline that was agreed.
Is that the only home that we would be studying flicker on?
That's the one that we've considered. We could look at others as well.
Well, if we're gonna do it, I don't wanna do it and then come back and, you know, say, oh, we gotta do it again for up the street.
Yeah.
So I think we should look at that.
We haven't gotten into locations on any of this because we're still trying to hammer out the details around the scope and approach.
We've been concentrating on noise.
In terms of the health questionnaire, again, that's pretty straightforward. We just agree on an industry practitioner that has the skill sets and expertise in dealing with sleep and stress-related disorders. You suggested that the questionnaire could be directed to folks that reside within 4,000 feet of the industrial wind turbine. It'd be a confidential survey. Those folks can articulate it, and it will be up to that professional, unbiased industry practitioner to lay out the criteria, what that questionnaire would look like, and you'd have your responses. You know, I think that's a pretty reasonable approach in terms of documenting the health aspects to this, since the turbine's been operational for almost a year now. So, I mean, it's not rocket science, pretty straightforward stuff. We're not looking at anybody that doesn't understand the space to manage the process. We just have to agree on the process, identify who's going to be handling it, and then let them do their job. And obviously have a sense as to what the cost is.
Yeah.
Tanya Trevison, I'm the attorney for the McKeevers at 151 Driftway. Just to add to what Mr. Thompson said about the 30 hours of flicker per year, the DEP actually has indicated that that can be included to 30 minutes per day is the allowable limit. So as recently as this past weekend, the McKeevers are experiencing over an hour of flicker per day.
Okay.
Is there a way that they can document that?
They have documented it. It has been submitted to the board by Mrs. McKeever via electronic mail,
How has it been documented?
Video.
video.
A video that runs for an hour, or
If you
whatever?
want it for an hour, I can get it to you for an hour if you want it, as long as you want. It starts in the front of the house, and it's carries right onto the porch, into the house, stays into the house for quite some time, carries onto the back of the house, out to the golf course.
Have you ever tried to compare that to the flicker modeling that study that had been
Well,
done? Besides what actually happens,
When
have
it
you
was-
ever tried to backtrack to then show that that's incorrect or just doesn't match up to reality?
I don't think, to my prior involvement in some of the pre-construction surveys and whatnot, I did ask them about the flicker, and there was some sort of somebody that must have done a study, and it was said to me that, you wouldn't get flicker at all. And then once we turn the clocks back, right around, that weekend that we turned the clocks back, that's when it hit, and it just has not stopped since.
And what was that? What was the weekend? What was the hour?
It ranges from about 1:30 to 3:30, and again, it's the angle of the sun, and when we first started, they shut it off, and we didn't get it for a few days, because at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the turbine stopped. And then it started back up at like 3:30, 4 o'clock, which was great because I didn't get any flicker in my house. But, again, I think as the season progresses, this shadow flicker will continue, but it will not continue like in the beginning when I first, that video that I had sent to Ms. Sullivan, the first video. I mean, it was like 3 hours, literally like at least 3 hours.
Yeah, this is in the springtime, right?
No, this was in the fall.
Okay, so
I don't know what it's like in the
So it's
springtime.
daylight savings time?
Yeah, when we turn the clocks back and the angle of the sun, however that has taken the angle, it's just, and it doesn't go away. It starts in the front of the house, it goes into the house, and when it gets it to inside of the home, that's when we have to vacate. You just can't stay in the house. It's just too bad. And then, once it gets out of there and it goes to the backyard, I mean, it's still bad, then it goes into the golf course.
To add to what Mr. McHugh was saying, the special permit that was issued to Scituate Wind, and this was part of the materials that I provided to the board back on November 14th. So it's part of the record from before. Paragraph 14 of the special permit states that based on the shadow flicker analysis, Scituate Community Wind Project at 167 Driftway. They never actually tested at 151 Driftway, apparently. Paragraph 14 continues to say, this report used a conservative approach and concluded that most of the specific receptors analyzed in the report were predicted to have below the commonly accepted tolerance of 30 experienced hours per year, with the exception of 141 and 151 Driftway with a 36.22 and 50.33 expected hours per year respectively. The report noted that the shadow flicker was expected to occur at these locations in the mid-afternoon in the late fall and winter months.
Because I went down to the driftway today about 11:30, and there was flicker on the driftway. And then when I came back a little while later, and it was only a little, there wasn't. And I don't mean to, but what it surprised me that it even didn't last long. Why did?
Because the head of the turbine will turn, and when we started to bring this up, as optimum industrial wind turbine, you want to get maximum, obviously, productivity out of this. It is at its maximum facing my home. And during the time when the sun sets, the head of the turbine spins to the north-northeast, still gaining spinning, but those blades, the angle of the blades are kind of parallel to my home. So you'll only get a little bit because of the angle of the sun and the angle of the blades, you're only getting a little bit. If you were to face that how it had always been was spinning, you would get, it's bad. It's not, it's bad.
Everybody in the room has seen the YouTube video. that was run, which was actually, one of them at least, is that 30-second clip that we had running here during a recent Board of Health meeting, I believe it was.
A month and a half.
So there was all kinds of nonsensical comments online about, well, that's only 30 seconds. Well, that actually, that day, the shadow flicker that the McKeevers experienced, that was a 30-second clip from a 2-hour experience on that one particular day. You saw the intensity coming off of that turbine on that particular day, and that's out there on the internet. So, you know, whether it's an hour, whether it's 2 hours, whether it's 3 hours, when the sun's out, it's consistent, it's oppressive, it's abusive, and we can document this quite easily for as long a period of time or as little a period of time. But everybody that was there that night saw that clip, and that's one of the most oppressive things that I've ever seen anybody experience in their own residential home.
And people around the world are looking at that. I'm looking at the stats. We also have a 1-hour video. We are trying to upload it.
Excuse me, did you give your name, please?
My name is Michelle Bannon, 149 Gilson. I have the domain where the McKeevers video was posted on YouTube. We've had people from around the world looking at it, a lot of people from Washington looking at it. That's another story. We also have a 1-hour video. We could not post it because of YouTube restrictions on time. We have now, we think we have overcome that, and we will be posting at least 1 hour of video in the near future. So if that's what you want to see, 1 hour as opposed to 33 seconds on the loop, it will be posted for the world to see.
And for the record, we can shift the this.
Yeah, no, and, but to go back to my point, if we're gonna study flicker.
Yeah. It's actually real easy to do. It's
Yeah,
a
well, that's
video
what I'm
camera.
saying, but I also don't wanna do it and then say, oh, we should have done, you know, come back later on and say, oh, we should have done somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know why we would say that, but
Let's identify what the scope of the problem is, and let's, you know.
well, we know what the scope of the problem is. What we're trying to appropriately define is the scope of the way to measure it and allow the Board of Health to better appreciate it.
Mr. Bishop, my name is Jerry Kelly. I'm at 56 Moreland Road. Today, the turbine was facing out towards Hummerock. Most days, it's not, and we get to enjoy the sound when it's facing back towards our neighborhood. When you face it that way, that's going to minimize the sound to our neighborhood and the shadow flicker. So that's why you saw that. At one point today, I believe it was facing towards us, but I know that for most of the day, it was squarely pointing out towards Hummerock. You normally don't see it in that direction.
Okay, well, we've got some goals set for the next meeting. I think we've had a good discussion. You guys are working together, the steering committee.
And our undertaking to those members of the steering committee that are in attendance is tomorrow you will have the questions that you're asking for around the octave bands and so on, Ms. Sullivan. We will get those to you. And another response around some of these other issues that we touched upon this evening. Our preference actually would have been to have been able to get a document to the steering committee before tonight, but time being was what it is. We didn't think it was fair to hand deliver it to you folks tonight without an opportunity to review it. So we'll proceed in the normal course tomorrow morning.
Could the members of the steering committee stay afterwards so we can compare calendars and fit a meeting date?
Fair enough. I want to thank everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any old business? We got the flu item.
Are you done, or you're-
I think we're done, yeah, on the wind
I'm
turbine.
just asking, I have not seen any minutes of any of these meetings.
Well, they're in process.
I'm just curious what the status is.
We should have them come.
No problem.
They're all,
That's on your territory.
That was appropriate. Thank you.